Hello, everyone. I'm going to be in conversation with Diba Mani from the University of Florida about her virtual exchange. Before we get started, Diba, please introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do at the University of Florida.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I am an instructional associate professor in the Department of Applied Physiology and Kinesiology in the College of Health and Human Performance. So I teach a wide variety of courses, everything from applied human physiology for a lot of pre-medical, pre-professional students to upper division courses like neuromuscular aspects of exercise or applied sports science.
Okay. Many of us won't know, and myself included, I don't know what kinesiology is. Am I even pronouncing it correctly? Please tell us what it is and how to pronounce it correctly.
Yes, I love the openness to learning about more unique or different fields. Kinesiology is essentially just the scientific study of human movement. So this can go down to exercise science, our biomechanics, our motor control, sports medicine. All of this falls under that umbrella.
Okay, so you've been doing a virtual exchange about neuromuscular science with researchers from around the world. Can you tell us a bit about the thinking and the background to this virtual exchange? What is it exactly?
Yes. So the original impetus for this was my students are pretty overwhelmed already with all of these pre-professional classes that they have to take. They have to take the degree requirement classes. If they're applying to go to medical school or physician's assistant school, dental school, they have all these prerequisites they have to take outside of the major as well. Maybe they have to take a lot of chemistry, physics, and so forth. So they don't have time for maybe the more social sciences or language classes, history, culture related courses. So the hope was that I can bring this international dimension to this science class by having the students integrate internationalization to the required course of, say, neuromuscular aspects of exercise. So the students then were already going to have to do some research paper review, go find a research paper on a relevant topic, look it up, learn about it, present about the science or the relation of that science to course content. So why not add an extra dimension? So the internationalization component came in where I started selecting the papers based on authors of those papers that I knew around the world, who I knew would respond to my students when my students reached out to them, likely through email, so that they would be open to having a live conversation with my students, meaning interview very much like the one you and I are having.
And how did that go? Were they open to it? And how did you structure that to make it an actual virtual exchange?
Yeah, this is a very unique case, and user beware. It had a lot of proactive preparation. The way that these people responded to it was they were quite open because I'd already established a relationship with them, where they were open to helping me as their colleague or maybe a former collaborator on a protocol or project, or maybe I was their student at one point. So they were open to it, and they knew to be expecting a message from one of my students from the University of Florida.
Were they in teams or was it pair work? How were they structured?
Yes, great clarification. The students were put in teams of 3 to 4. The class was about 50 students in each section. Some semesters I had 2 sections, so that was about 100 students.
That's a
So in
lot
teams
to
of 3 to
manage.
4.
That's a lot.
Right. I made my life easier though by making them being teams of 3 to 4. I don't even think I have 100 good enough colleagues around the world who I'd be able to bring in about research related to neuromuscular aspects of exercise for my students to interview. So there was one researcher or one person abroad, a partner at a different institution somewhere across the globe, and then my students in batches of 3 to 4.
So what came out of these exchanges? How do different institutions conduct research into neuromuscular aspects of science?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this is one of the questions I wanted my students to essentially look into beyond just the science, because it's great. Learn about how the reasoning for why, the nervous system sends these electrical signals to do this muscle action works. That's one part of it, but also what is the research that underlies that, and how do the people that essentially do that research, uh, what are the steps they have to take to be able to do the research in the first place? So the students were asked to ask the students, asked to ask the researchers
Mm.
questions about their workplace environment, essentially. The Institutional Review Board, as we call it here in the US, the IRB board, which is essentially an ethical group that reviews research protocols to make sure that they are safe and sound for human subjects. So it turns out that all of these institutions that we worked with across the globe have some sort of ethics board. They just go by a different name.
Mm.
So we have the IRB in the US, other countries have different ones. And the students learned about this and they realized, yeah, so other countries, other institutions across the globe still do value the ethics. Some of the stereotypes that maybe they had in mind are not true. And in the end, science is very global. Everybody can't look up or research everything. So if I learn a little bit about that institution in Stockholm and what they do in neuromuscular physiology, then I can connect it with what I do at the University of Florida. And maybe somebody in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia will be able to use that work to further expand on that topic.
You've cited Saudi Arabia, you mentioned Stockholm. Can you tell me a few of the other countries that were involved in this exchange?
Yes, absolutely. I created a lovely little map that I wish I could share with you. It's not labeled, so I'm going to try to guess by looking at it here. We have representation from Australia. We had representation from Iran, from Japan. I mentioned Saudi Arabia, Brazil. We have a collaborator, of course, in Canada, so it's pretty close. And so, of course, we had people from the UK, and we had people from Italy. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, they're all over the place,
Very
essentially.
varied. So were they given, I mean, they had this research paper to start off with, were there, and they had a synchronous interview. So they had asynchronous activities in between or as content as well? What did they have to produce? What was the outcome at the end of this?
Yes. So the interactions that they had with the researcher included, of course, communicating and organizing the meeting that they were going to have. It was just one live meeting, unless there was reason for them to have follow-ups, and that would be through usually email. Maybe a few of them shared their mobile contact information with the group. But I left it to the students to one, learn and appreciate time zones,
Mm,
respecting the time zone of the researcher so that, my students have to accommodate to them and learn about that.
mm.
Uh, I also asked my students to essentially be developing their professional development, their prep for their own lives and futures. So the students were trying to come up with their own professional emails and salutations in these correspondences. The students were responsible for maybe connecting with the researchers on professional networking sites like LinkedIn. So this was all things that they did asynchronously that were either strongly encouraged or required to be able to do the assignment.
Mm, mm.
After this interview, because the students were in small batches, doing them in groups of 3 to 4, and not everybody in the class was able to connect with every single researcher, they had a presentation. So the
Okay.
presentation entailed summarizing the research paper, connecting it to course content, and the internationalization component, where they spoke about their researcher, they spoke about the ethical maybe background of the institution that that person came from, maybe the institution that that researcher represented was a key or prominent uh, force in a particular component of the course topic. So they mentioned that and so forth.
So at the end of this, what are some of the interesting or surprising cultural differences in terms of research that your students discovered? What did they say at the end about this?
Well, I think more intriguing to the students was the lack of differences in some way, how similar we are, which is what we're trying
Round.
to promote. Yes, so they realized they could have opportunities to go study abroad potentially, or maybe do their graduate school work abroad. At least one student recently reached out in hopes of connecting with the researcher that they've spoken with in Japan because they were interested in pursuing graduate school there. I think the differences are more related to how the classroom setups are, the grading schemes, more class and academic related. rather than cultural in some ways when it comes to just science itself.
That's interesting. So, were you hoping that some of the students would reach out and think about studying abroad then? So you mentioned one that reached out to Japan. Do you think others have broadened their horizons or might reach out in the future and change their plans as a result of this?
Absolutely. I didn't realize how important it was for me that the students use this as a stepping stone potentially to study abroad or just travel abroad. I don't know, of course, as much about whether the students did this afterwards. Many of the students in this particular class are juniors or graduating seniors by the time they take it with me, because it's an upper division class. Uh, but now that I lead study abroad programs, since developing this internationalization component to this course, I value so much more the connections that my students can make with researchers in any of the topics that they might be interested in, so that when I do lead the study abroads, I make it a point to go to universities as at least a couple of our excursions on each trip so they can connect with these people. I make it a point to go to maybe different companies in, say, Germany. We were in Munich over spring break. So I dragged my poor students over to a prosthetics company so they can learn about this. Maybe they don't end up coming to Munich to pursue an apprenticeship in making prostheses, but they might be interested in that in the US. So that's
Hmm.
still a win for me.
So, in the future, will you repeat this particular virtual exchange? Will you modify it in any way? What are some of the things that worked well and some that worked that you might change that worked less well?
Yes, this is my baby of a internationalization virtual exchange. It was the first one I did within the first year of starting a position as a faculty member. It was special to me because I was connecting my new students with older colleagues, but it was also in the midst of COVID that we had a lot of these sections happening. So we did this in person fully. We did this in a hybrid setting, the semesters that we were first in person, and then we had to convert to fully online because of COVID-19. And then we had them in fully online classes as well. So the modifications I've made over the semesters have been things like in-person presentations versus virtual presentations, asynchronous presentations versus synchronous, working in groups of 3 to 4, or maybe doing a modification of this virtual exchange so that they do it on their own, maybe not with someone that I connect them with. The limitation, of course, that I've seen since then, and using this as a virtual exchange in my classes is that it takes a lot of work, and I feel uh, I don't want to disturb my colleagues and these folks that are semester after semester contributing to these efforts. So in the future, I hope to do it again. I just felt like I needed to give people a little bit of a break.
Anything else you'd like to add as a takeaway or an observation before I let you go and get on with your day? Any final
Uh,
comments?
Yeah, I think this was the impetus for the passion that I now have for internationalization and globalizing our science, technology, engineering, math courses, so our STEM classes. Because again, these are students that don't typically make the time for the classes that are more easily internationalized or have a global component. So now I make it an effort to integrate this in any of my courses, and to, of course, continue doing study abroad in hopes that those STEM students will come abroad with me and get a little bit of that international skill development.
Thanks so much, Diba, for your time today. It's been really, really
Thank
interesting.
you. Yes, thank you so much.